Very good morning to all of you. Cik Mahathir, Dr. Nur Azman, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm asked to share about the role of the Malaysia Digital Economy Blueprint in empowering the Malaysia's data center and cloud ecosystem. But let me figure how to use this. Let me take us back about more than a decade ago when we had the economic transformation program. You know, these things are not new. They did not start with the blueprint. In fact, during the economic transformation program, as you all remember, there were 12 national key economic areas: healthcare, palm oil, and rubber, and so forth. And we have two actually NKEAs at the time that's quite relevant to this. Number one is business services. We have what we call the entry point projects. There were altogether 131 entry point projects to support the economic transformation so that we become a high income nation by 2020. That was the ambition then. So under the business services, there was one particular entry point project we called positioning Malaysia as the world-class data center hub. Okay. In fact, the main implementer is, of course, MDEC. And besides that, there's also another national key economic area, that's the communications, content, and infrastructure. Primarily, actually, implemented by the Ministry of Communications and its agencies under it. And one of the entry point project, they call it EPP. EPP 10 is extending the regional network. It sounds very generic, but the whole idea is actually to increase submarine cable landing so that you can reduce the cost of connectivity and hopefully attract data centers as well. So they are interconnected, these two entry point projects. And in fact, I think at that time there were some investments announced. We had what we call the progress update quite often at the time. So move on a bit. We have later what we call the SPV, or Shared Prosperity Vision 2030. Okay, under the Shared Prosperity Vision, you have what we call KEGA, Key Economic Growth Areas. Oh, they sound a bit similar. And these are all long-term plans. And one of the KEGA is digital economy. And you have ad enablers. And again, one of the enabler is related to data, big data. And if you read those documents, it it's stated there that government should work with the private sector to actually encourage investments in data centers in Malaysia to support this aspiration. So we move on next to the Third Malaysia Plan. Okay, Third Malaysia Plan, that's between 2021 to 2025. We have one chapter on advancing digital economy and boosting digitalization and advanced technology. Okay, under it there are a few priority areas. One of it is digital economy, and under it there's again some policy recommendations for digital infrastructure. Of course, the digital economy blueprint and the Third Malaysia Plan should be read hand in hand because it covers more or less the same period and a bit. Of course, the digital economy blueprint is both in Third Malaysia Plan and 13 Malaysia Plan. So part of what was laid out in the digital economy blueprint is actually in the Third Malaysia Plan. So again, there's this statement of encouraging cable landings to actually support or to attract the development of data centers. And last year, we launched the Digital Economy Blueprint. Okay, that's a 10-year document implemented in 3 phases. In fact, this year, it's the end of phase 1. Okay, time for review. And we have targets to be achieved. Some of it, we have actually crossed the barrier, especially in e-commerce. So 500,000 new jobs, access to internet, coverage by 2025, 100% coverage. And the targets are for 2025. It's not a 10-year target. The target is for the half of the period. And for businesses, actually, we have to revise the target when it comes to contribution to the GDP, because last year we actually exceeded the target already of 22.6%. I guess those conservative estimates were done prior to the pandemic. And then at that time, we envisioned that 875,000 MSMEs will, onboard into e-commerce. But again, we exceeded that last year, 890,000. It was a report from EdTech, which I saw that figure that we have crossed the barrier. And my friend in EdTech now has to come up with a new target. And of course, the others includes 70 billion investment in digital projects, and I'm sure EdTech together with MyDIGITAL will see it through. Not an issue. And then of course increase the number of startups to 5,000. And as for government, I'm sure the speaker from Mamtu will elaborate more, Jadi. You have targets of 100% civil servants being, digitally literate. I think efforts are underway to upskill all of them. 80% end-to-end online government services, and 80% usage of cloud storage or cloud computing. And of course, it's relevant to what we're speaking today. And in terms of policy trust, there are 6 policy trusts to address 6 of the challenges identified by the authors of the document. Number 1, of course, to drive digital transformation in the public sector. Number 2, to build an enabling digital infrastructure. Number 3, to actually look at inclusive digital society to narrow the digital divide. 4, to boost economic activity through digitalization. 5, agile and competent talent, fit for future talent to prepare us for the next what's coming. And finally, to build confidence, you have to ensure the society embraces digitalization. You have to build a trust and secure environment. So those are the 6 challenges and also the policy trust that's supposed to address them. And under these 6 policy trusts, there are 22 strategies and 76 initiatives, both at the national level as well as the sectoral level. I won't go through each and every one of them, but I will now quickly zoom in to one of the policy trusts that's enabling digital infrastructure. And under this policy trust, there are 6 initiatives, as you can see there, and one of it, centers around data centers. Of course, it is worded in such a way that it looks at domestic data companies to provide high-end cloud and computing services. And of course, there are various programs under it, and it's actually something that is spearheaded by the Ministry of Communications. And there are other 5 initiatives that are, around it, actually, in a way, supports as well. You see, for example, Ministry of Communications needs to undertake the review of laws and regulations to improve the provision for digital infrastructure. Again, talking about infrastructure, talking about data centers as well. And then expand the adoption of the one-stop center 3.0 for local authorities to actually speed up the approval, again, in the development of digital infrastructures. And I was told about 98 local authorities already have adopted this, and I'm sure they're working towards making sure all the local authorities, adopt this system. Finally, number 3, to provide real-time broadband demand platform. You have now the gender map application to actually look at coverage and also provide feedback to the authorities. It's already done. This one checkbox tick. And of course, broadband to be mandated as the third public utility. And I was told also that all the state governments have actually sort of adopted this. Again, something that the Ministry of Communications have achieved. And finally, one of the so-called initiatives is about attracting international submarine cables landing. And this one, as you know, is actually a repeat of what we saw in the economic transformation program. Okay. Now that doesn't mean those are the only initiatives that are relevant to the development of data centers and to support the growth of data centers. If you look at all the policy trusts, actually, in some way, one way or another, they do provide impetus, or support for the development of data centers. For example, if you look at public sector, there's also initiatives related to the use of cloud services in government department, and there's a target set. Of course, that will drive demand, and also initiatives related to the upskilling of public servants actually increase the so-called capacity for them to work on this. And through economic, the economic competitiveness policy trust, of course, when you are more competitive with more investment, this drives the demand again for cloud services and data centers. In terms of inclusive society, making sure no one is left behind, you actually increase the accessibility for people to use these services, as well, again, to drive up demand. Trust, of course, there's nothing, surprising them, because when it comes to storage, or you want to attract investment or lending of these centers in Malaysia, the environment has to be secure, right? And finally, when you talk about workforce, one of the things that contribute, one of the requirements to actually host these centers in Malaysia is to ensure that we have a sufficient skilled workforce. Okay, so these are some of the initiatives that actually contribute towards the growth of the sector. And in addition to the blueprint, actually, the MCMC or Ministry of Communications through the Multimedia Commission, they actually run what we call the NILS, or the National Interconnection Ecosystem Lab. Before it was called the National Digital Infrastructure Lab. It was renamed. So this is the second lab that looks at how can they accelerate in support of the initiatives under MyDIGITAL. And some of the case for change they found, this lab was done last year, was to look at the number of hyperscale investment, high IP transit price, and low number of peer entities, and the unequal experience between Sabah and Sarawak and Balance Malaysia. I hope there is a session from MCMC to actually elaborate more on the findings of the lab. Okay, so some of these will hopefully actually expedite some of the implementation of the initiatives under the blueprint. So finally, blueprints are blueprints. They are documents. There's a draft if we don't implement them actually with discipline. So we have to implement them with discipline. And again, when it comes to implementation, nothing is cast in stone. Like I said, this year is the final year for the phase 1. We will have a review and we look at our positions and some of the initiatives and targets as well. And finally, both sides, the public and private sector, we need to engage. And that's all. Thank you very much.
All right.
Effort and for gracing our event here today. Thank you.